Hello, my name is Uma. My sister flipped a table and poured wine on me in front of my entire family because I wouldn't give her money for a car. But that wasn't the beginning. The real betrayal? It started years ago, with a forged signature, a stolen credit line, and a mother who looked away every single time. Now I'm left with one question no one wants to answer. How do you fight for your place in a family that's already erased you from the picture? They say every family has a storm hiding behind polite smiles. Mine chose to strike during dinner. It was early November. Cold, wet leaves clung to my windshield as I parked in front of Seraphine's rental home on Hawthorne. I was late. That wasn't unusual, but tonight it mattered. Mom's birthday. I knew I'd walk into a scene. Candles burning too low, laughter that didn't quite reach the eyes, a family held together by fragile traditions. When I stepped inside, the warmth of the house hit me like steam, artificial, suffocating. And my sister's voice carried from the dining room. Of course, I told the contractor I don't settle for standard finishes. She was mid-boast, her signature tone, smooth, polished, performed. I greeted everyone quietly, hanging my coat on the rack, and slid into the seat farthest from the head of the table. I smiled when someone made eye contact, but no one asked how I'd been. Seraphine dominated the space. Always had. The table was dressed like a magazine shoot. Handmade place cards, wine glasses that matched the runner. The only thing off balance was me. The food was decent, nothing special. Roasted chicken, steamed vegetables, garlic rolls that had clearly come from the frozen aisle. But Seraphine praised herself like she'd prepped for MasterChef. I wasn't surprised. She'd been crafting a public image since MySpace. You know, Mom wouldn't even have this house if I hadn't stepped in during the refinance last year, Seraphine said, tossing her curls back as if she'd carried a nation, not signed a piece of paper. Some people never step up, but that's not me. Everyone nodded. My mother smiled in that thin way she did when she wanted to avoid tension. I took a bite of salad I didn't want. I knew exactly who some people was supposed to be. I tried to speak once about a client who'd just opened her own bakery, a story about growth, healing. But my cousin changed the subject halfway through my sentence. I laughed it off. Not the time to press. Mom raised her glass. To Seraphine, for always showing up. You've been a blessing. No one looked my way. I swallowed. Then came the ask. So, Seraphine said, tapping her nails on her wine glass, I've been looking at this SUV. Practical, safe, top of the line. I figured it's time. You know, for Mom. I'm always taking her to appointments, stores, church. I could feel it coming before she finished. I was thinking, she continued, looking at me now, you could help cover it. Just a little. It's not even about the money. It's about family. All eyes turned toward me. My mother tilted her head. She's asking nicely, honey. I smiled, the tightest smile I could manage. I hear you. But right now is not the best time for me financially. Silence. Then Seraphine laughed, a short, bitter sound. You make 6 figures, Uma. My heart thudded. And I manage 6-figure responsibilities. I said no. Her face twitched. The shift was instant. You know what? This is so typical of you. My jaw clenched. You sit there with your cold face and your little judgments. You pretend you're above all this. But you never give, not really. You hold on to your money like it's your god, and then you show up once a year and act like you're doing us a favor. I didn't speak. I didn't move. Seraphine's chair scraped back, the moment stretched out. You think you're better than us? She shouted. I opened my mouth. Too late. With one violent swing, she flipped the table. The roast chicken hit the floor. Wine glasses shattered. Silverware clanged against tile. Gasps. Then, slowly, deliberately, she picked up her half-full wine glass and walked around the table toward me. Let's toast to Uma, she said, for always making everything about herself. She threw the wine. It hit my head, my blouse, my dignity. I sat still. My mother gasped, not at Seraphine, but at me. Why did you push her that far? She said, like I'd loaded the wine in her hand. Nobody stood up. Nobody reached for a napkin. I looked at my cousin. He looked away. Someone whispered, every time she comes, it turns into something. My hands trembled as I reached for my purse. I didn't say a word. I didn't yell. I didn't ask why. I just stood, dripping, and walked to the door. "She always ruins everything," I heard Seraphine mutter. The air outside was colder than I remembered. My keys slipped once in my palm as I opened the car door. I slid inside and exhaled. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. Wet hair, red wine streaking down my neck like paint. "They saw it," I whispered. My reflection didn't blink. They all saw it. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I laid in bed, fully dressed, the scent of red wine still clinging to my hair, clotted in the fabric of my sleeves. I should have washed it out, should have showered, but instead, I stared at the ceiling as if some answer would appear. An explanation, a justification, anything to make the whole night feel like a misunderstanding. But nothing came. Eventually, around 2 a.m., I got up. The light in the kitchen made everything look colder than it really was. I peeled off my blouse, dropped it into the laundry hamper, and wrapped myself in an oversized sweatshirt. The fridge hummed. The heater kicked on. Portland nights in November had a way of curling into your bones if you weren't moving. I sat down on the couch and pulled my knees up, wrapping my arms around them like I used to when I was little and scared. My mind replayed everything: Seraphine's face, her voice, the moment that glass of wine left her hand and hit me. My mother's expression, not horror, not even disappointment, just exhaustion, as if I'd caused her yet another inconvenience. I wasn't angry, at least not yet. I was stunned, not just by what happened, but by what didn't. Not a single person spoke up for me, not one. At some point, I reached for my phone. I needed a distraction. Something. Anything. But the screen told a different story. I opened the family group chat. Or tried to. It was gone. I refreshed the app. Logged out. Logged back in. Still nothing. I scrolled over to Facebook, opened Aunt Denise's page. There it was, a photo from the dinner, posted just 2 hours ago. The caption read, "A beautiful night celebrating love and family. So much peace in the room." I zoomed in on the picture. Everyone was smiling, glasses raised. My mother seated at the head of the table, Seraphine next to her, cousins, uncles, even that friend of the family I hadn't seen in years. Me? Gone. I remembered sitting at the far end. I had definitely been in frame. But in this photo, I'd been cropped out, literally. Even the chair I was in had been edited to look empty. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until my chest started to ache. They weren't just pretending nothing happened. They were pretending I hadn't even been there. The kind of betrayal that creeps into your bloodstream isn't always loud. Sometimes it slips in through omissions, through digital scissors. I opened my laptop, logged into the shared cloud folder Mom and I used for family photos and documents. Something I hadn't looked at in months. She hadn't changed the password. The page loaded slowly, then fully. I clicked on the family album folder. The banner at the top had a new photo. It was one of our family portraits from a few years back, everyone in coordinated autumn colors. I remembered the day. It was cold, and Seraphine had made a fuss about lighting. The photographer had to reschedule because her assistant was sick. But this photo, it looked different. My eyes narrowed as I zoomed in. They had airbrushed me out. Not entirely. A faint silhouette remained, like someone had started erasing and stopped halfway. You could barely tell unless you knew where to look. But I knew. It was my outline. My elbow still there, just barely. "They're rewriting the story," I whispered to the empty room. Without me in it. I closed the laptop. Sat still for a while. Then I stood, walked to my bookshelf, and pulled down a small navy blue notebook I hadn't touched in a long time. The pages smelled slightly of cedar and age. I opened to a blank page, dated the top in shaky pen. Entry. Title: The Night I Vanished. I wrote, "They didn't scream me away. They erased me slowly, politely, until I stopped being seen." The words flowed more easily than I expected. Years of swallowed feelings spilling out like a cracked dam. No one had to scream. They just had to stop looking at me, stop acknowledging my place at the table. They made it so easy to doubt my own presence, and I had let them. I put the pen down and leaned back into the couch. It hit me then. This wasn't about a dinner. This had started long before the wine glass shattered, back when Seraphine took credit for the first check I wrote to help Mom cover property taxes. Back when I'd drive 4 hours to fix something at the house and they'd say, "You didn't need to do all that." Back when my silence was rewarded with phrases like, "You're the calm one," "You're the strong one," which really just meant, "We expect you to take it." And I had, for too long. Now they were cutting me out of photos, conversations, the digital memory of our family. But I wasn't gone. Not yet. I stood in front of the mirror the next morning, staring at the lines under my eyes that felt deeper than usual. The faint red blotch near my temple, where the wine had dripped down and dried into my skin, still lingered. No amount of washing had erased it entirely. Maybe I didn't want it gone just yet. It reminded me that the story hadn't ended. I brewed a pot of strong coffee, dark roast, almost too bitter for anyone else's taste but mine. The smell alone brought my father back into the room, like he was still sitting at the kitchen table in his flannel shirt, waiting for the Sunday crossword. I carried my mug to the window and pulled open the curtain. Portland was waking up, gray clouds pushing through the sky, neighbors dragging garbage bins to the curb, dogs pulling leashes down the sidewalk, people starting another ordinary day. I wondered if anyone else had sat in a room the night before and watched their family pretend they didn't exist. As I sipped, something old stirred in me, not anger, not quite, more like a quiet tightening in my chest, familiar, unwelcome. I didn't ask for this memory to resurface. But that's how trauma works. It doesn't knock. I was 10. Seraphine had knocked over Mom's ceramic vase, the blue and white one our grandmother had brought over from Italy before I was born. It smashed into 3 jagged pieces, water soaking into the carpet, the stems of the daisies cut and scattered. She gasped. Her eyes darted to me, and without hesitation, she pointed. "Uma did it." I stood in the doorway, holding a book I hadn't even finished reading. I hadn't moved an inch. But Mom didn't ask questions. She didn't look at the evidence, the angle of the mess, the impossibility of me causing it. She just scowled, yanked me by the wrist, and said, "You're the youngest. You should know better." That was the first time I understood what it meant to be erased without ever being invisible. I hadn't even cried. I just looked at Seraphine, who smirked from behind Mom's back. And then I remembered Mom kneeling by the broken vase that night, gluing it together. It was crooked. One shard didn't fit, so she tucked it behind the stand and said, "Close enough." Just like our family, always gluing things back together in the wrong shape. That day came rushing back to me now, tangled in the scent of bitter coffee and cheap red wine. I sat at my dining table, flipping through the mental Rolodex of moments like that, too many to count. Times I was told to understand, to let it go, to keep the peace. "You're the strong one," they said. What they meant was, "You're the one we expect to absorb it all." I set my cup down. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, then it buzzed again. This time, it was a text from my cousin Lydia. "Hey, just so you know, about the vacation gift last night." My stomach clenched. I tapped to open the message. "She thought it was from Seraphine, but I saw you leave it in the kitchen the day before. The card was in your handwriting." I stared at the screen. My hands didn't tremble this time. A minute later, another message followed. "She must have taken it and rewrapped it. Just thought you should know. I won't say anything unless you want me to." I didn't respond. Instead, I stood and walked to the bookshelf, pulling down the black envelope I'd used to order the vacation voucher for Mom's birthday. Inside, I had saved the printed confirmation, the booking code, even the tracking number from when the package was delivered. My name was on every page. The date, the destination, the thoughtful touch of knowing it was the spa retreat Mom had once mentioned 3 years ago after her sciatica flared up. Seraphine didn't even know what sciatica was. She thought it was a dance move. I traced my fingertip over my signature at the bottom of the confirmation. "Even my kindness," I whispered, "was stolen. There was no confrontation, no dramatic phone call, no storming over to demand truth. I didn't have time for scenes." Instead, I opened my laptop and created a new folder on my desktop. Truth, to be used only once. I began organizing everything. Screenshots, emails, receipts, scans of notes from past bank transfers I'd made to help with Mom's house repairs, transfers Seraphine had claimed were from her. I pulled out the handwritten card I'd slipped into the gift envelope, the one with my favorite quote from Dad written inside. "Love isn't loud, it's consistent." That card never made it to Mom's hands. I scanned it and added it to the folder. By mid-afternoon, I had filled 5 folders, each labeled Gifts, Financial, Digital Footprints, Witness Statements, Family Photos, unaltered. I didn't know yet what I'd do with it all. But I knew this. I wasn't going to let them write me out without proof that I had always been there. Seraphine may have been louder, bolder, flashier, but I was precise, and I remembered everything. The phone buzzed again. This time, I didn't look. I closed the laptop, stood up, and walked to the window. The city had moved on, but something in me had just started. They'd erased me from the narrative. Fine, but if they wanted the pen so badly, they'd have to pry it out of my hands, because the story wasn't over. It was just about to begin. The next morning, I didn't rush anything. I let the sun rise fully before I moved from bed. The legal folder sat closed on the corner of my desk, where I'd placed it the night before. It didn't demand my attention, not yet. It just waited, like I was finally teaching myself to do. After breakfast, I gathered my purse, keys, and a small folder of tax documents I'd left behind at my mother's house, something I'd postponed retrieving until I had no emotional excuse left. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I didn't ask if it was a good time. I wasn't going to give them the chance to say no. The drive was short. Familiar. I had driven this route so many times I could have done it with my eyes closed, but that morning, it felt different, like I was visiting a museum I used to live in. When I pulled into the driveway, Seraphine's new Lexus sat out front, polished like she had a photo shoot planned. I parked behind it. As I walked toward the front door, I could already hear laughter from inside. I paused on the porch, took one breath, then rang the bell. It wasn't Mom who answered. It was Aunt Clara. "Oh," she said, her smile fading for a beat. "Didn't know you were coming by, Uma." I smiled, polite but firm. "Just here to pick up some files from my old room." She stepped aside without inviting me in. "Of course, make yourself comfortable." Inside, the living room was filled with voices. A few cousins, my uncle, Seraphine. They were all gathered around the dining table, helping Mom with thank you cards for her birthday. I stood in the foyer, invisible again. That's when I heard it. "She's not really part of this family anymore, is she?" The words came from my Aunt Clara, not angry, just casual, like she was commenting on the weather. I didn't react. I didn't walk in and announce myself. I just stood still and let the sentence land the way it had landed in them, light, dismissive, almost routine. "She made her choices," someone else muttered. I turned and walked down the hall toward my old bedroom. The door was different. It used to be cream-colored, a little scuffed at the bottom from years of me kicking it closed with my foot. Now, it was painted a sleek, dark gray. The little wooden nameplate I had carved with Dad when I was 12, gone. I turned the knob. Inside, the bed was missing. The bookshelf was gone. In its place stood boxes, dozens of them, stacked and labeled with Seraphine's business logo. There were ring lights in the corner, branded merch along the walls, and a life-size cardboard cutout of Seraphine posing with arms crossed and chin tilted. It wasn't a bedroom anymore. It was storage. No photos, no signs that a little girl had once read books under a blanket in the corner, cried into a pillow after losing her first job, journaled for hours during a breakup. It had been wiped clean, like I never slept here, never grew up here. I opened the closet. Empty. Even the floorboard where I used to hide Christmas presents had been nailed shut. I pulled open the top drawer of what used to be my desk. Nothing. They hadn't stored anything of mine. They'd discarded it. I gathered the small box I'd come for, just a few folders, old financial forms, a framed photo of Dad from his last birthday, and turned to leave. As I walked back through the hallway toward the kitchen, I heard my mother's voice. "You're more of a daughter to me these days," she said, her tone light, affectionate. My heart tightened. I stepped around the corner and saw her pouring tea for the new housekeeper, a woman I didn't recognize. They both laughed. Mom touched her arm. "You just get me," she said. I didn't interrupt, didn't clear my throat. I turned and walked out the front door, the box hugged against my chest. In the car, I sat for a few minutes. No tears came, not this time. Something had shifted. I didn't want to be part of that house anymore. Not the furniture, not the memories, not even the grief. It was all hollow now. That evening, I sat on my balcony, sipping a cup of tea. The sky was streaked in burnt orange and pale lavender. Portland's apology for the kind of day I'd had. I picked up my phone, called Seraphine. She answered on the second ring, her voice smug. "Wow, I was wondering how long the silent treatment would last." I didn't engage. I kept my tone level. "Don't ask me for anything again," I said. There was a pause, then a laugh. "Oh my God, dramatic much?" "I'm serious," I replied. "Next time you do, I won't answer with words." Another pause. "You good?" she said. "Because you sound a little unstable." I hung up. No screaming, no threats, just the click of a line ending. Later that night, I turned on my laptop, opened the folder labeled Truth. I renamed it Legal. I uploaded everything I had, every receipt, every letter, every date-stamped digital file. I organized them into subfolders. I created backups. I drafted a timeline. If they wanted to pretend I'd never existed, I was going to make sure the evidence said otherwise. I hadn't heard from my mother since I walked out of her house with that old tax folder clutched against my chest. Not a text, not even a passive-aggressive Facebook comment. That kind of silence would have once rattled me. Now, it clarified things. A week passed. I kept to myself. I cleaned. I refiled old documents. I went on quiet walks around Mount Tabor, keeping my phone tucked away, ignoring every family group thread that had previously excluded me anyway. Then, on a dull Thursday morning, I got a text from Mom. "Let's have a small dinner, just the three of us. No drama. Let's talk like family." There was no emoji, just that brittle sentence. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "Sure." That was all I wrote. I wasn't walking into this expecting apologies, or fairness, or even the decency of neutrality. I had no fantasies left to prop me up. I was going because I knew what they didn't. The difference between showing up and surrendering is strategy. Dinner was set at 6:00 p.m., sharp. Seraphine's condo this time. Her space. Her rules. I arrived at 6:04. "Glad you could make it," she said, opening the door with a rehearsed smile. Her tone was sticky sweet, and I could practically smell the performance. Her eyes scanned me quickly, like she was checking if I'd brought anything threatening. Like truth. Mom sat on the couch with a glass of wine, wearing the cardigan I'd given her last Christmas. She didn't look up immediately. "Dinner's in the kitchen," Seraphine said, leading the way. We sat around the glass dining table. And candles lit, a roast chicken in the center, everything just a bit too carefully arranged. I took the seat furthest from the host, just like always. We ate in near silence for a few minutes, chewing through the tension. Seraphine poured wine for herself, then Mom. She didn't ask me if I wanted any. She knew better. Eventually, Seraphine cleared her throat. "So," she began, "we've been thinking about how to move forward, for Mom's sake." Mom nodded, slowly, as if she wasn't quite following the script. Seraphine continued. "We know things have been tense. Misunderstandings, emotions. But the most important thing is stability. For the family." I didn't respond, just sipped my water. "And," she added, sliding a large manila envelope across the table toward me. "In that spirit, we wanted to simplify a few things, legal things, just to prevent future confusion." I didn't reach for the envelope. "What is it?" "Just clarification," Seraphine said. "Equity, property. You know how things can get messy without formal boundaries." Mom shifted in her chair but didn't say a word. "Just look it over," Seraphine insisted. "We can go over it together." I opened the envelope. Inside, a multi-page document labeled Household Equity Adjustment Agreement. It was phrased carefully, professionally, deceptively. Buried two-thirds of the way down was the real language, a forfeiture clause, in legal terms so sanitized it barely sounded like theft. But that's what it was. They wanted me to sign away any stake I had in the family home, under the guise of making things clean. "Take your time," Seraphine said, "but it's pretty standard stuff. Honestly, it's just paperwork." I smiled politely. "Would you mind if I stepped outside for a moment?" They both blinked. "Now?" Seraphine asked. "I just need some air." I stood, took the folder with me, and stepped onto her balcony. The city below buzzed with evening traffic. I snapped a quick photo of the key pages and texted them to Mike, a law school friend who owed me a favor. I stared out over the street as I waited. 4 minutes later, my phone buzzed. "Mike, don't sign that. That's a total forfeiture clause. You'd be waiving your entire claim to the house. It's clean, quiet theft. Let me know if you want a full breakdown." I pocketed the phone, returned inside. "Thanks," I said, setting the folder back on the table. "I'll think about it." Neither of them asked what I thought. That wasn't the point. They just needed to know I wasn't playing. I didn't stay for dessert. Back home, I pulled open a storage bin in my bedroom closet. I hadn't looked through it in a while. I sat on the floor, digging through old photo albums, receipts, handwritten letters from my father, one of the only people who ever saw me for who I was. Near the bottom of the bin, tucked inside a hardcover book about estate planning, was a sealed envelope with my name in his handwriting. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a short note. "Uma, if they ever try to take from you what is yours, remember, you were always the one I trusted to protect it." Beneath it, a notarized deed, dated 3 months before his death. My name was on the title. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I stood, walked to my desk, and opened the folder I'd labeled Truth to be used only once. I added the new documents, then renamed the folder Trust Activation. I didn't call them. I didn't threaten them. I wrote a single text to Seraphine. "You asked me to be quiet. Now I'm asking you to be ready." The next morning, I scheduled a meeting with a real estate attorney. It was time. The next morning, I took my coffee to the porch instead of my desk. The air had that late autumn edge, just sharp enough to keep you alert, but not enough to bite. I needed the clarity. The call from my attorney was scheduled for 9:30, and I wanted to walk into it calm and resolved. By 9:15, I was already logged into the video call platform, documents spread neatly across my table. When Helen, my real estate lawyer, joined the meeting, she gave me a warm nod. "Morning, Uma," she said, straight to the point. "I reviewed the deed, the letter from your father, and the situation with your sister. You've got more than enough. Let's secure it properly." I nodded. We spent the next hour walking through the paperwork. Helen guided me through each page of the trust formation. Dry language, yes, but every signature carried the weight of years I had swallowed down. By the time I signed the final page, transferring full control of the house into the Uma Patel Irrevocable Trust, my hand felt steady. When we finished, she looked at me. "It's done. They can't touch it now." I exhaled, something between relief and preparation. Helen added, "The notification letters will go out today. They'll get them by tomorrow." By mid-afternoon, I got confirmation from the courier. Both my mother and Seraphine had received their letters. I imagined the look on Seraphine's face, probably somewhere between disbelief and performative confusion. She didn't call, but someone else did. At 4:42 p.m., a thick envelope was dropped into my mailbox. No return address. Inside, a finance statement. A bill for a luxury SUV. My name on the auto loan. A dealership I had never visited. A car I had never seen. I sat down and pulled out my laptop, heart steady but burning. I called the dealership, voice controlled. "I'm calling about a loan issued to a vehicle in my name. I never authorized it." The woman on the other end, cheerful and clueless, tapped away at her keyboard. "Let's take a look here. What's the name and birth date?" I gave her my details. "Okay, yes, looks like we do have something filed. Application was approved 2 weeks ago." My hand clenched the phone tighter. Who signed for it? Looks like the signature on file matches what we have on the contract. Do you want a copy? Yes, email it to me now. She did, and when I opened the attachment, there it was, my name, my stolen information, but not my handwriting. I recognized it instantly, Seraphine's dramatic looped P in Patel. The same handwriting she used for birthday cards and fake apologies. I hit record on my phone. Quick question, I said calmly. Do you have any record of the IP address used to apply online? There was a pause. I can't give you that directly, but I can send a request to our fraud department to flag it. Please do. I'm reporting this as identity theft. I hung up and immediately filed a fraud alert through all 3 credit bureaus. Then I pulled a fresh credit report. What I saw made my pulse rise. Again, not from panic, but calculation. 2 brand new credit cards. 1 personal loan. A PayPal account I had never opened. All within the past 90 days. All active. I followed the rabbit trail, confirmation emails sent to a Gmail address Seraphine had used in college, a phone number I recognized from years ago. I checked the IP logs through my own email system and found the traces. Every login attempt to my accounts had come from her zip code. I froze the accounts, filed a full report with the Federal Trade Commission. I didn't text her, not right away. I needed her to feel the silence closing in first. Then, just before bed, I received a message. Seraphine, what's all this? Are you seriously doing this to your own family? I replied with one image. The car loan application, with her forged signature clearly circled. No response came. That was louder than any denial. The next day, I changed my phone number. I notified my firm that I was taking a 2-week leave. My assistant offered to cover for me without asking a single question. I think she knew, or maybe she just respected someone who finally started protecting her own peace. That afternoon, I drove to the hardware store, bought a fireproof lockbox, and spent the evening organizing every piece of evidence I had. When it was all inside, I closed the lid, turned the key, and placed it under my bed. No more talk it out, no more give her the benefit of the doubt, no more meetings with smiles and hidden knives. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table. The apartment was quiet, but not like before, not suffocating. It was the kind of silence that signaled safety. A few hours later, Helen called. Uma, she said, we got a reply from their lawyer. I waited. They're claiming Seraphine had power of attorney. I raised an eyebrow. Do they have a copy? They haven't produced one. I leaned back, breathing slow and full. I already knew what they were doing, stalling, bluffing, hoping I'd flinch. But this time, I had everything. Let them try. This time, I had receipts. The call from Helen came just after lunch as I was folding a blanket on the couch. The tone in her voice wasn't urgent, but it was clipped, precise. They responded, she said. Seraphine's attorney claims she had verbal power of attorney, and they're threatening a countersuit for defamation and financial withholding. I didn't blink. So they're gambling on a lie, I said. Helen paused. Exactly. But unless they can produce written proof, it's not going to hold up. They won't find any, I told her, because it never existed. I figured, she replied. Still, we'll treat it seriously. I'll handle the filing. Let me know if anything else comes in. We hung up. I stood there, the blanket still half folded in my hands, and felt a familiar twinge. Not fear, but that sharpness of knowing exactly what someone's next desperate move would be. Seraphine was going to press. When people like her get cornered, they don't retreat. They twist harder. That night, I opened the cloud backup folder where a copy of the birthday dinner video was supposed to be. Gone. Not missing. Deleted. The file name had been there just days ago. Dated, labeled, clean. My cousin Matt had taken the video. He'd even texted it to me after the dinner, saying he caught the whole thing. Now it was gone. I called him. Hey, Matt, I said, trying to sound casual. Quick question. Do you still have that video from Mom's dinner? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, Uma, yeah, about that. It's not on my phone anymore. Did you delete it? No, he said, sounding genuinely nervous. I swear, I didn't. My phone reset the night after. All my settings went weird, like someone factory wiped it. I didn't think much of it until just now. I didn't say anything. Then he added, Seraphine borrowed it for a few minutes when I stepped out to the bathroom. Said she wanted to send herself a photo. I didn't even think about it. Of course she had. She got to the only copy, I murmured. I'm sorry, he said. I feel like I messed up. You didn't, I replied. You just forgot who you were dealing with. We ended the call. Later that evening, I was sipping tea on the couch when a message popped up from Aaron, an old colleague from my corporate days. Aaron, you won't believe this. I was at the Apple store today, and guess who was there? Your sister tried to open a new financing plan. I blinked. My phone vibrated again with a follow-up. Aaron, she got denied. Right there, at the counter, sales guy said her credit is flagged for active fraud investigation. She turned purple, stormed out. I didn't laugh, I didn't smile, but something deep in me clicked. A correction, a balance. The world was starting to see her for who she was, not just the sister who smiled on cue, but the one who weaponized kindness and repackaged lies as loyalty. I went to bed that night with my phone on silent. When I woke the next morning, a package was sitting on my doorstep. No note, no return address. Inside, I found a flash drive and a folded piece of paper with handwriting I hadn't seen in years. Uma. I stayed quiet too long. I hope this helps now. Isolde. I sat down slowly, heart pounding for the first time in days. Isolde had vanished from the family a long time ago. Our middle sister, the one who left without explanation. She'd always been the softest, the most private. When Seraphine took over the family dynamic, Isolde faded out rather than fight. I hadn't heard from her in over a year. I plugged the drive into my laptop and opened the files. Dozens of voice memos, screen-recorded conversations, email exchanges, audio clips of Seraphine saying things like, Mom's gullible. She believes whatever sounds good in the moment. Or worse, Uma thinks she's smart, but she's too cold to be loved by this family. I listened to each file with the kind of stillness only survival gives you. Not surprised, not even hurt, just affirmed. Seraphine hadn't just stolen from me. She'd been painting me as the villain behind my back for years. I added everything to my encrypted folder. Then I wrote an email to Helen, attaching a zip file labeled Supplemental Evidence, Isolde Patel. I wrote a single sentence, received via anonymous delivery, verified voice, ready to proceed. Then I drafted a formal letter. It wasn't angry. It wasn't aggressive. Just clear. To Seraphine's lawyer, any further misrepresentation or tampering will be considered obstruction. Attached is verified audio evidence of intent to manipulate. We are not negotiating. We are proceeding. I signed my name, printed it, and had it scanned and sent. That night, I checked Seraphine's Instagram. The polished headshots were gone. Her last 3 posts deleted. Comments turned off. In one of the private finance Facebook groups I occasionally browse, someone had posted anonymously, Is it illegal to use your sibling's identity to open accounts without telling them? The responses were swift. Yes. Absolutely. Call the FTC. I logged out. Let the storm she built rain where it may. By the time the email came in from the court clerk, I was already dressed, sitting at the kitchen table with a full folder in front of me and an untouched cup of black coffee cooling beside my hand. I knew what the email would say before I opened it. But I needed to read the words, to let them settle over my skin. Subject, confirmation of filing, protective order, granted. My claim had been accepted. The case would move forward. Seraphine was being summoned to appear before the Financial Fraud Review Panel within 30 days. A protective order had been issued in my name, preventing her from accessing or modifying any accounts linked to me or the trust. My lawyer had followed through on every detail. Every signature had been authenticated. Every file notarized. There was no turning back now, and I didn't want to. That same afternoon, I wrote the letter. Not legal, not formal, not filtered through any attorney's hand. Just me, my words, my tone. It began with facts. A copy of the deed, the certified trust documents, The full list of transactions opened fraudulently in my name, a clear and non-negotiable statement of ownership. But the closing lines, they weren't for the court. This is not revenge. This is reclamation. I will not play the role you assigned me anymore. From this point forward, I name myself. I printed 2 copies. One went into an envelope marked for Seraphine. The other, addressed to my mother. They were hand-delivered by courier. Later that evening, I received confirmation. Both envelopes had been received. Seraphine signed for hers. My mother didn't open the door. The delivery driver left it in her mailbox. By the following morning, a freeze had been placed on all of Seraphine's personal accounts. Her joint credit cards were halted. A notice of formal investigation had been issued by the State Banking Fraud Division. I wasn't gloating. I had no joy in any of it. But I did feel light, lighter than I'd felt in years. Helen, my attorney, called to confirm. "Everything is in motion," she said. "You've done what most people never dare to. You held your own family accountable." "I didn't want to," I admitted. "But you had to." She was right. Around 2 p.m., my phone rang again. My mother. I stared at the screen for a full 30 seconds before answering. "Uma," she said, and her voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard since my father's funeral. "Did you really have to go this far?" "I didn't go anywhere," I said calmly. "They did. I just refused to follow." She hesitated. "This will destroy Seraphine." "No," I corrected. "She did that herself. I'm just done cleaning up the mess." "You're still family," she pleaded. "We're still family." "No," I replied. "Family doesn't leave bruises, even the invisible ones." I hung up before she could respond. That night, I stood in front of the house. My house. The same one Seraphine once bragged about managing. The same home I had been erased from. I took a deep breath and signed the final paperwork, transferring the deed permanently into the trust. It was now my legal residence. The locks would be changed within the week. The next morning, 2 certified letters were sent, one to Seraphine, one to my mother. They were being given 30 days to vacate the property. No drama, no threats, just documentation. Around noon, I returned to the house to meet with the locksmith. As I stepped onto the porch, Seraphine was already there, arms crossed, pacing. When she saw me, she stopped. "You can't be serious," she said. "I am." "You're actually throwing us out over some paperwork?" "Not paperwork," I corrected. "Forgery, theft, exploitation." She stepped closer. "You think you look strong right now? You look pathetic. You're breaking Mom's heart." I didn't react. "You can't just take everything," she snapped. "I didn't take anything," I said. "You handed it to me when you underestimated me." "You're really gonna shut the door on your own sister?" "You shut it first," I replied. "When you poured wine on me and called it family." For a moment, something flickered in her eyes, like maybe she remembered or maybe she never forgot. Either way, it didn't matter. I turned toward the door. "You can't flip this table," I told her. "It's not yours anymore." She didn't follow me. She didn't scream. She just stood there, in the middle of the front yard, as I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. And for the first time in all these months, I didn't shake. I didn't replay the moment. I didn't question if I had gone too far. I stood still, present, accounted for. This wasn't the ending I had once hoped for. It wasn't warm or poetic or soft, but it was real, and it was mine. The sound of the door clicking shut behind me still echoed in my ears, even now, weeks later. It was faint, like the memory of thunder after a storm, but it stayed with me. That last moment, that small, final sound. There had been no footsteps trailing after me, no voice calling me back, no apology shouted down the porch steps, just stillness. But this silence, it didn't ache. It didn't bite. This silence belonged to me. Room by room, I moved through the house like someone walking through a version of herself she was only just beginning to understand. My bare feet touched the cool hardwood, and with each step, I inhaled a different kind of stillness. It wasn't the heavy, tension-soaked quiet that used to suffocate every family dinner, the kind where words were weapons and glances were landmines. No, this silence was soft, spacious, honest. This silence let me breathe. The boxes were long gone. I'd unpacked the last of them a week ago. The furniture had been rearranged, not to erase what happened in this house, but to allow something new to bloom in its corners. I kept the old couch, worn and a little sun-faded, because it had comfort even when people didn't. I kept the armchair Dad always fell asleep in on Sunday afternoons, though I reupholstered it in moss green. He'd have hated it. But it suited me now. That was enough. Everything that remained, I had chosen to keep. Every piece had passed through the filter of my own want, and in that simple act of curation, I began to rebuild not just a space, but a self. I didn't scrub the house of its history. I let it breathe with me. That morning, sunlight poured through the front window like honey. I sat there in a patch of warmth with a journal in my lap and a mug of tea nestled between my palms. The air smelled faintly of citrus and lavender. A hummingbird darted by the window, hovering near the hydrangea bush out front, the one I'd almost given up on reviving. But like me, it had chosen to stay. Chosen to try. I put pen to paper and wrote a single line. Every inch of this space was once filled with echoes of who they told me I was. Now, I get to find out who I've always been. A knock at the door pulled me out of the moment. When I opened it, no one was there, just a small, unmarked envelope resting neatly on the mat. I knew the handwriting instantly. Seraphine's looping script, too familiar to mistake. No return address, just Uma, written in a style that once adorned birthday cards and grocery lists. And too many apologies that had never really meant anything. I didn't hesitate. I didn't bring it inside. I walked straight to the fireplace, opened the screen, and laid the envelope on the grate. I struck a match, held it to the paper's corner, and watched it catch. The flame was quiet, steady. The paper curled into blackened curls, then ash. It wasn't rage, it wasn't revenge, it was release. Because I no longer needed her words to find closure. I'd stopped asking fire to tell me who I was. Later that week, Isolde stopped by unannounced. She carried a tray of lemon shortbread cookies and a small potted plant that looked like it hadn't been watered in a week. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't launch into a long-winded explanation about the silence, the absence, the looking away when it mattered most, and I didn't ask her to. We sat side by side on the porch in the old rocking chairs, mugs of tea in hand, our bodies swaying gently to the rhythm of the breeze. The leaves rustled like whispered stories overhead. We didn't speak for a long time. Eventually, she said, barely louder than the wind, "You saved more than a house, you know." I turned to her. "What do you mean?" "You saved yourself," she said, like it was the simplest truth in the world. "You changed the script." I looked out toward the street, to the trees lining the sidewalk, and the kids riding bikes up and down the block like time had never stopped. "I didn't even know I was the one worth saving," I murmured. "Not until I was gone," she nodded. That was enough. A few days later, I ran into a cousin at the grocery store. We made polite conversation in the produce aisle, surrounded by apples and avocados. She mentioned that Mom hadn't been well, said she hadn't left the house in weeks, that the usual calls from neighbors had stopped, that she spent her mornings sitting at the window, not speaking much. I nodded, not out of triumph, not out of guilt, just understanding. That night, I sat down and wrote a letter, not to send, just to write. "Mom, I spent my life trying to be a daughter to someone who only saw me as the keeper of peace, but peace that comes from being quiet isn't peace at all. I hope someday you understand that I didn't leave. You just stopped seeing me. Uma." I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer with the others, a collection of unsent truths, necessary words written not for them, but for me. Small steps followed. I joined a women's writing circle at the community center. We met on Tuesdays in a sunlit room that smelled of old wood and fresh coffee. The first time I shared my work aloud, my voice trembled. My hands wouldn't sit still. But afterward, a woman with salt and pepper hair and eyes full of storms took my hand and said, "You put into words what I've been feeling for decades." That was enough to keep going. I started mentoring a few younger women, some fresh to Portland, others rebuilding after divorces, one just stepping out of a job that had swallowed her self-worth. We met at coffee shops or over Zoom. I didn't try to be a savior. I just listened. I asked better questions than I used to. That was my offering. And every Friday, I bought myself a bouquet from the flower stall on Belmont. Sometimes sunflowers, sometimes lilacs, sometimes just whatever looked bright and open. I didn't buy them for display. I didn't arrange them for guests. I bought them because I was worth beauty. I wasn't lonely. I was alone, and that was different. One afternoon, I walked to the mailbox with sunlight warming my shoulders and the breeze playing with the hem of my shirt. Inside was a card from the writing group, handwritten, signed with gratitude and kindness. No agenda, no strings. I smiled. That evening, I opened my journal again and wrote, "They tried to write me out, but I became the pen." I set the journal on the windowsill, right beside the small plant Isolde had brought me. It had started sprouting new green shoots. And just maybe, peace isn't the absence of noise or conflict. Maybe peace is the sound of your own voice, finally free to tell the truth. Sometimes, the deepest betrayals don't come from strangers. They come from the ones who share your last name. This wasn't just about money or property or even lies. It was about reclaiming your voice in a place that tried to silence it. What would you do if your own family erased you to protect their comfort? If this story resonated with you, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe for more true family stories that dig deep into what we often leave unsaid.